Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome to our deep dive first look at Invasion Malta, the newly released wargame from Legion Wargames and designed by Vance Von Borries that covers the hypothetical Axis invasion of Malta during World War II. Now this is a deep and meaty simulation with a 40-page rulebook, 700 counters, and a number of mechanics to capture all of the combat in detail. As a bonus, this game also includes Invasion Leros, which is a smaller game that captures the Axis invasion, the actual historical Axis invasion of the island of Leros in World War II. Let's jump in and get started with a quick overview of our game. Now this is a two-player solitaire-friendly game that has 3 scenarios covering the invasion of Malta and 1 scenario covering Invasion Leros. The Axis forces are on the offensive, the Allied forces, largely British forces, are defending Malta or defending Leros. And we'll talk more about the scenarios as we dig further into this video. Now if we flip over the game here too, we can see some of the parameters in terms of the scope and scale. Each turn represents 8 hours of real time, and each scenario has 8 to 11 turns in length, which means that the scenarios in themselves cover the initial 3 to 4 days of the invasions of these islands. Now, units are at the company and battalion level, so kind of that high tactical level game that's going to allow a lot of different mechanics and a lot of different simulations of combat to be modeled. Let's now take a look, however, at our rule book and dig into that. Let's start by taking a look at our rulebook. This is on an 8.5 by 11 glossy paper, 40 pages long, and all but the back 2 pages. The combat results table here and some of these pictures on page 39 are the only real exceptions to the rules. So we've got 38 pages of rules here, and there's a good bit of text content in here. There are graphics and explanations and some examples of play and things like that. But for the most part, this is this is loaded with rules. So, and there are no optional rules. So the 38 pages here consist of the core rules that you'll want to know to play the game. And that's something I think you want to be aware of. This has got a high level of detail. This is for someone who really wants to dig into these island invasions and World War II island invasions at a kind of a complex, meaty level. To give an idea of what we have in the game in terms of mechanics, I thought I would list a few of them here. Some of them, but not including. We've got supply, we've got weather. Stacking is modeled with a stacking value per unit, and you can have 9 value points of stacking in a hex, but you can also have excess stacking, which can be modeled in a hex. We've got some specific motorized rules for units because the terrain was really rough on Malta. Units have an efficiency rating, which is kind of a rating of their quality. There's a disruption manic. There is an efficiency rating check, an efficiency rating differentials that are calculated. There's a lot of different formation based, so the Germans and Axis units are based by formations, whereas the Allied units, their formations are dictated by geographical location. There's an activation system, kind of a chit pull system to guide the course of play. Day and night restrictions, artillery, anti-aircraft, airstrikes, close air support, combat coordination, paradrops, gliders, drift mechanic for how they're going to land and whether they're going to land in their accurate places, headquarters with command points, naval elements, convoys, and amphibious invasions. It's all here. So that begets the question, what would I give this game as a complexity rating? I think I'm at about a 6.5 out of 10. I might go a little bit higher. The thing that I'm keeping it at a 6.5 out of 10 is that I have read through the rules. I think they are very clear. I don't think there's any questions I have as I've gone through them. Now, when a game has this much content, when there's a lot of systems modeled, oftentimes questions arise as you start to play. So this is kind of a pre-play evaluation of the rules. But I think the writing of the rules and the explanations are very clear. Every time I've had a question, the answer has been presented there. So I think it's a very well done rule set. And, complexity in a rule set is fine as long as there is clarity. Complexity with ambiguity would make this very hard to play, but I think the high level of clarity that I'm seeing with the rules here makes me very encouraged that, this is going to be a game that you can pick up, be a little bit patient with, learn, really kind of get the systems down and really enjoy as you play forward. Let's go now to take a look at our scenarios book. Scenarios book is much smaller. We've got 16 pages here. The back has our designer notes about some of the mechanics and some of the gameplay. We've got the Paradrop Drift, which is talking battalion specialist units and things, and then a glossary of reading, kind of in resources that was used to build the game. The rules mentioned this is a game I think that was highly researched in terms of potential order of battle. So I think there's been a lot of time kind of modeling the units and thinking about how this invasion, especially from Malta, would have played out. So these are the scenarios that we've got here. If we kind of look forward, there are three Malta scenarios. There's a 1940 invasion of Malta, and they don't vary by length, they vary by geographic time. So the first one is 1940. This would be the fall of 1940. This is largely what would amount to an Italian invasion of Malta. Then as we go into 1941, this becomes a German, kind of a more of an Axis, a German-centered invasion of Malta. And then scenario 3 would be summer of 1942, a much larger invasion force hitting the island at that point. So they vary in kind of size and scope and the kind of the orders of battle to give you three different really kinds of hypothetical circumstances under when Malta potentially could have been invaded during World War II. And then Invasion Leros is a smaller scenario that it covers the Axis invasion, mostly German invasion of the island of Leros, which would have been which was in 1943. Now, a couple things on these. The gameplay length for this is listed as 8+ hours. And so again, that gives you an idea that there is a lot in each one of these turns. We're talking about an hour per turn to play some of these scenarios. The sequence of play, as we take a look at, has quite a bit of heft to it too. Let's jump in and take a look at our counters now. We have 4 counter sheets, just over 700 counters, printed on 2 sides. Most of the units have a step loss system attached to them. So as units suffer casualties, they're going to get flipped over to register their step losses here. And these counters are 6/10 of an inch wide. Now, a couple things here too, as we're looking at these gray German forces, we can see the colors inside the NATO symbols. That dictates which formations they are, and we can see these formation chit pull markers here that you're going to be pulling out for these different units. That's going to activate this formation. They're going to go through a whole sequence of play, and then you do that about 5 or 6 times per turn to kind of work through the activations for each of these formations as you're playing. Now, if we look at one unit in particular, say one of these 335 paratrooper units, we can walk through a little bit what some of the numbers mean. The left number just to the left of the NATO symbol is the stacking value for that unit. Each hex again can have 9 points of stacking in it, and once you go over that, you can have more, but it's excess stacking and they have difficulty participating in combat. They suffer adverse effects if they get attacked as well too. So generally, I'm sure you want to avoid overstacking if you can, but it is a possibility. Then across the bottom, a very standard attack value, defense value in the middle, and then movement value in the bottom right. Then above that, to the right side of the NATO symbol, we can see that 7. That's the unit's efficiency rating, and oftentimes you're making a die roll check against that unit's efficiency rating to see if it can do a certain action in a turn. So it's almost like a morale check for the unit, if you would, if you think of some of the tactical combat situations. The top right number is the designation of that unit, so it's not a number that factors into some of the calculations in gameplay. And if we look here now, we can slide over and see the green here. These are the Italian units. Not a lot of armor on this. The terrain apparently on Malta, from what the rules say, was actually not very amenable to using a lot of vehicles around here. So vehicles are limited in terms of their movement. So as we can see, mostly we've got paratroopers, infantry modeled here, and especially, of course, invasion force isn't going to have a lot of armor available to it as well. So it's a high kind of infantry level game as we look at these here. And if we slip over now, the last 2 counter sheets, well, the last one here, the third one here is the British forces. Again, relatively small number of motorized units and armored units here. A lot of anti-aircraft, and then some infantry here that are, manning the main the defensive positions. And if we look here, we can see more. There are some fortifications here as well. And then these are our markers. These are to kind of designate different amphibious invasion zones, disrupted, out of supply, and then those excess stacking markers in case you need them. Let's shift right into our player aids. This is the expanded sequence of play. So you can see here, there's a lot to each turn. And basically right about here at the beginning of the operation segment, that's where you're going to pick the chit to activate a certain formation. And then you're going to work through either this ground sequence or a pass option option here, which is very easy. But this ground sequence has naval transport phase, airborne operations phase, movement phase, combat declaration phase, bombardment phase. Then we come up here into the reaction phase, the combat phase, and then a reset phase. And each one of these phases has a number of steps. So again, this is someone, you want to play this, you're looking for a highly detailed, grand tactical recreation of this hypothetical Battle of Malta, which of course I think one of the exciting things about this game is that it brings airdrops, gliders, and amphibious invasion to this thing, and you've got an island where you're playing literally on the entire island, as we'll see on this map here. So I think this is really kind of, it's almost like its own miniature D-Day kind of invasion force execution, if you want, all contained within the island of Malta. So I think there's a lot to like here in terms of potential gameplay mechanics and things that you're going to get to do. I think it's going to be a really fun game to play, and I'm encouraged by the level of details and kind of clarity in the rule set too. So that's our sequence of play. All of these are on a kind of a thicker, light glossy card set here. Then we get a number of charts. This is our combat results table chart. We slide over here on one side on that victory point schedule. If we consider victory conditions in the games are basically by capturing objectives, and there also are some loss factors in here too. There are some automatic win conditions for the Axis if they reach one of two places in Malta and then one location in Leros. Then it's an automatic victory for the Axis invasion forces here. Then artillery capability charts, so again, bombardment charts. There are sequence of plays and sequences to execute with things like artillery, air support, and all these kinds of anti-aircraft comes into play there. Coastal artillery chart for Leros, landing condition table. So again, you're getting an idea here. There's a lot of stuff modeled here. This is a game you're going to want to slow down, take your time, and really dig into and enjoy the level of detail that this game presents. Convoy arrival table, terrain effects chart here for the last one. And again, each one of these is single-sided here. Let's jump in now and take a look at our additional set of player aids. There are 8 of these. These are the setup guides for the individual scenarios, all printed out on a nice heavy cardstock so you can put the units down. It's going to make setup and deployment so much easier. So I really, this kudos for Legion Wargames for putting these in. These of course are all single-sided, so be able to kind of get them out, set them out beside the maps here to be able to use your setup and deployment. Because with the Germans in particular, you know, the British forces are on the island and stuff like that, but the Germans are coming in by air, by sea. It's not all at once, so there's a lot of different stuff going on. So having this kind of sequenced out here, we can even see for this first one here, which is the Malta 1940 scenario, largely an Italian invasion force, you know, the 4 different convoys consisting of the different ground troops that are there and figuring out how they're going to land those, and then a limited number of paratroopers here for the Italian forces here. Here's the British one, setup guide for that. So again, everything laid out nice and clear. You can drop the units right down here and move them that way, and they continue on that way. So this is Malta 2, and this is a bigger one. This is a double sheet. So again, we can see that scenario 1 is a smaller scale than scenario 2. This one has almost double the British units. And then scenario 2 here, again, is largely a German invasion force that alters the Malta 1941 scenario. And we go up to scenario 3, gets even bigger still, about the same for the British, with about a page and a half of the, about 2 pages of these units here. But then the scenario 3 for the Germans actually is 3 sheets here. This is fairly large, and this has both German and Italian forces. This scenario 3, the largest Malta scenario of the 3 of them there. And again, game time play about 8 hours. That feels right. I think even some of these larger ones might go longer. Then now we come to the last one. This is a smaller scenario with only 1 sheet here. So scenario 1 and scenarios 1 and 4 are smaller. Scenarios 2 and 3 are larger, with 3 being the largest. Although this says Malta, this is the Leros invasion scenario. And we can see here now the Italians are on the Allied side, where the time we're here in 1943. So British and Italian units defending the island of Leros, and then the German forces, the superior, tactically at least, German forces, but outnumbered forces leading the invasion force here. So great to see these. I love seeing these setup guides available to make the setup and organization of gameplay much easier. Just a couple little bits to take a look at. We get some baggies for storage of counters. We get a book reference, Operation C3, Hitler's Plan to Invade Malta, 1942, a recommended reading for this. And then lastly, we get one 10-sided die for combat resolution. Let's jump in now and take a look at our maps. Here we are with our maps. I love the level of detail on these maps. Now these are paper maps, and so you butt these two together to make the island of Malta. And on the width here, along the bottom scale here, it's 22 inches wide for one sheet. So the entire width of Malta is 44 inches. The vertical height of the map for the footprint is 25.5 inches. Now each hex represents a width of 600 yards. So again, we can see down here, there's a lot of gritty detail in some of these towns. We get trails and major roads and things like that, cliff and courts. And then this is probably also a good time to talk a little bit about the replayability and depth of the game. We can see designated over here the different potential landing zones, and this is also connected, I think, to the solitaire aspect of the game. So with the Allied player is going to set up a number of their units in the Malta scenario, for at least the one I was reading about in the scenario there, and then the German player is going to secretly pick their landing zone, their preferred landing zones and landing plan there. Then the British set up the rest of their units and they go forward. So really, that place right there where the British player is setting up some of their forces without the knowledge of where the with the knowledge of where the Germans would be conducting their invasion, is probably the only place really where you're going to see kind of a little bit of fiddliness with the solitaire, right? You probably could do a die roll for where the Germans invade, but because of the number of landing zones and the number of opportunities, I think this game lends itself to a lot of replayability, because as the Axis forces, depending on where you're landing and depending on how your airdrops go and things like that, this game I think is going to play out quite differently in terms of the tactical challenges that it presents. So, you know, we've got the three scenarios, which basically are three full-length invasions of Malta with completely different orders of battle. So that's one element I think that's going to hit the depth level there. But then just the variety with which the landing zones can vary, which with tactics and strategy, weather and things like that can vary too. I think there's going to be quite a bit of replayability here. I mean, even if you play each of the four scenarios once and they take 8 hours, that's 32 hours of gaming right there, which is, I think, a pretty good return on investment here. So I think this game's going to offer a lot of value for the price here too. Now, there are some elements around the map here. On the left-hand side, we have some storage areas, and then I'll show a close-up in here. There's an entire drift mechanic for the airborne actions, for gliders and for paratroopers in each of the two games. So, you know, where you want them to land and where they're actually going to land could be two very different places. So that's kind of, I think, going to be a fun thing to model as well. And then we have just game turn tracks up there and some terrain keys over there as well, and some turn track up on the top right. So this is the Malta map. I really like this one. I think it's going to, it seems like a very clean and functional map as well. Let's jump in now and take a look at the smaller Leros map. So here we have our Invasion Leros map. Again, we can see it's half the footprint of the Invasion Malta map, 22 inches here on the vertical, 25.5 inches on the horizontal there. But the same style, same art style, same system, and the same scale, 600 yards to the hex here. Now, you know, the game, the back of the box says 8 hours plus to play one of these scenarios. I would guess that this one's, even though it's, I think it's an 8-turn scenario for, or maybe it's actually 11 turns for Leros too. Still, I think because of the reduced counterpool and things like that, that this game would probably play, I would guess, faster than 8 hours. I'm not really sure. But I mean, again, these turns do have a lot of depth to them, and 11 of those turns are probably going to take a while to kind of play through, especially as you're learning. But again, we see a variety of landing areas, so options in terms of replayability for the Axis forces and for the British forces. So I think this is going to play out a number of different ways. And it's just kind of cool that you've got, you know, 2 complete games based on the same rule set. So once you learn how to play one, you're going to be able to play Leros and Malta, play both games in one. It's kind of cool that they've added 2 games into the same box system here. So there we have it, a first look at Invasion Malta and Invasion Leros. Invasion Malta being the hypothetical battle for Malta during World War II, and then Invasion Leros being a simulation of the historical battle of Leros during World War II. If you've enjoyed this first look video, you might also like to take a look at our video that explores A Glorious Chance, another Legion Wargames wargame that covers the battle for Lake Ontario during the War of 1812. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great day.